And then what did the defendant do after he initially arrived on scene?
He went to assist those officers with attempting to place Mr. Floyd in the backseat of the vehicle.
And did you observe the body-worn cameras then of various officers at that moment that the defendant approached the vehicle?
Yes.
Okay. Describe what you saw as best you can recall when the defendant approached the vehicle.
They were attempting to place Mr. Floyd in the back seat of the vehicle. Mr. Floyd was actively resisting, moving around. He was attempting to get out of the back seat of the vehicle. Clearly, he didn't want to be back there, and the officers were trying to initially place him in the back seat, grabbing the seat belts and things of that nature, and then ultimately the decision was made to remove him from the vehicle.
Okay. Now, at the point that Mr. Floyd was removed from the vehicle, right, when he was taken out of the vehicle and brought to the ground, do you recall what happened? How did the officers proceed to remove him from the vehicle?
Yes, so they were pulling him from the driver's side passenger door, which is the street side, and they were pulling on his legs and his arms, and once they got him out of the vehicle, they someone placed him on his knees, or he kind of went on his knees.
And so now getting back to before he was placed, or who was attempted to be placed in the back of the vehicle, do you recall what Mr. Floyd was saying when the officers were trying to get him in the back of the vehicle?
Yes, he was saying that he couldn't breathe. He was saying he was claustrophobic, and that you know, he didn't like being back there.
Did you see him, or did you hear him indicate that he had anxiety and that he was afraid?
Yes.
Answer is stricken.
And, well, based on, what do you recall Mr. Floyd telling the officers?
Numerous times he had stated that he was afraid. He had had COVID before and he couldn't breathe, and he had anxiety, and he was claustrophobic.
Now, based on those statements and the way Mr. Floyd was acting at the time, do you believe that what the officers did to try to get him in the vehicle in and of itself was reasonable actions?
Yes, it could be perceived as reasonable, yes.
But were there other alternatives that they could have done besides trying to force him into the back of the car?
Yes.
Sustained.
Was it necessary for the officers to use force at that particular point?
Objection, cause for speculation.
Overruled.
Not necessarily, no.
What else could they have done?
They could have continued to try to verbalize with him. It appeared early on.
I said overruled.
Please continue.
It appeared early on that the Officer King had gained a slight rapport with Mr. Floyd early on, and so police practices, it would have been best to try to continue to verbalize with him because he had gained a rapport with him, and try to get him to comply with his commands by verbalization.
But nonetheless, you believe, in your opinion, that it was not unreasonable for the officers to attempt to place him in the back of the car?
Correct.
And now I'd like to play a segment for you of what happens when they were getting him out of the car and initially placing him on the ground. So at this time, I'd like to publish King body-worn.
Less than 0.2% compared to unvaccinated healthcare workers who had considerably higher infection rates. So we're making incredible progress. There's a lot of good news. Moving quickly. Cases are going back up. Hospitalizations are no longer declining. While deaths are still down, way down from January, they're going up in some places.
Why do you do that to me? Does he want to jail him? He's under arrest right now for forgery. I'll tell you. Tell me what's going on. Forgery for what? For what? Please, man. I can't fucking breathe. Hey, come on out. Look at you, thank you. Thank you. Get him on the ground. Yeah, on the ground. On the ground.
Right. And so, at the point, then they decided to bring Mr. Floyd out of the car, and you could see on the video, Mr. Floyd was initially brought to his knees. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And what did you hear Mr. Floyd say after he was initially brought to his knees?
I believe he said thank you.
And if you could continue.
You got your restraint? Hobbled? Okay. I'll grab that. Jesus Christ. I can't breathe. Thank you. I can't breathe. Stop moving. Mama.
Thank you. Now, after he was initially on his knees, and they began to put him to the ground, is that correct?
Yes.
What position did the officers place Mr. Floyd when they brought him on the ground?
Prone position.
And what is the prone position?
A prone position is where you lay a person on their stomach, chest area.
And you can see that Mr. Floyd had already been handcuffed, is that correct?
Yes.
And so at this point, he is now prone on the ground, handcuffed, correct?
Yes.
Prior to him being in this position, did you see any aggressive actions, or what could be interpreted as aggressive actions on the part of Mr. Floyd?
Prior to the prone position?
Prior to the prone position.
Yes.
What did you see?
He kicked his leg.
And could you describe that kick and how that might be interpreted by a reasonable police officer?
Yes, so the officers were still attempting to control Mr. Floyd at the time, and as they were trying to place him down in the prone position, I believe one of the officers was attempting to control his legs, and Mr. Floyd kicked their arms away in an attempt to try to possibly break free from the officer's grasp.
Aside from that one kick, did you see anything else in your review of any of the materials, the body-worn cameras, that would constitute an act of aggressive behavior by Mr. Floyd?
No.
And that was at approximately, 2019 and about 35 seconds, is that right?
Practice social distancing. Wear a mask as recommended by the CDC. Practice social distancing. Wear a mask as recommended by the CDC.
And that was at approximately, 2019 and about 35 seconds, is that right?
Approximately.
And when we are evaluating then the restraint period, this is about the time we're starting, is that right? Right after he was placed on the ground prone.
Yes.
Did you hear the defendant ask a question regarding a restraint at that point?
Yes.
And what was he asking about?
I believe he asked for the hobble.
What is the hobble?
The hobble is a restraint that's used to bind a person's legs in order to control them better and stop them from either harming an officer or breaking property. In most cases, kicking out the windows of police vehicles.
And if I can show you, show the witness and not the jury.
Of 18 or older will be eligible to be vaccinated. No more confusing rules. No more confusing restrictions. My message today is a simple one. Many states have already opened up to all adults. But beginning April 19th, every adult in every state, every adult in this country is eligible to get in line to get a COVID vaccination. Appeal to our seniors and everyone who cares about them. While we have made incredible progress vaccinating 3/4 of our seniors, and putting vaccination sites within 5 miles of 90% of the public, it still isn't enough.
Sir, is this the hobble restraint that you were referring to?
Yes, sir.
And when is this hobble restraint used?
Typically on someone who's actively aggressive towards the police.
And the person who you see in Exhibit 200, the hobble has been applied, what position is this individual in after this hobble has been applied?
The side recovery position.
And what's the side recovery position?
Side recovery position is when you place someone on their either left or right side to assist them in being able to breathe better.
What's the purpose? Oh, I'm sorry. And you said it's to assist in being able to breathe better. Is that right?
Yes.
You familiar with the term positional asphyxia?
Yes.
What does that refer to?
It refers to when a person is in the prone position and while they're in the prone position, they have a difficult time breathing, and it may cause death.
Right. If you could remove Exhibit 200. All right. Now, once the officers had Mr. Floyd on the ground in the prone position, and you can see that he was handcuffed, and I'd like to bring a still image, Exhibit 255. That Exhibit 255, that's approximately where we left off in the viewing of the video. Is that right?
Yes.
Once that has been done, the officers here after the kick had an assessment to make, isn't that right?
Yes.
And that is whether or not they would continue to use the hobble or begin to use the hobble.
Leading is sustained. Rephrase.
What assessment did they have to use, have to make at this point?
Well, based on the defendant's request for the hobble, they had to assess whether to continue to apply the hobble to the Mr. Floyd.
Okay. And based on your review, did they do so?
No, they did not.
And what does that suggest to you regarding their assessment of the dangerousness or the need to restrain Mr. Floyd?
Based on my review, I would believe that they felt that he was starting to comply and his aggression was starting to cease.
And was that consistent then with your own observations of what you saw Mr. Floyd do as the video continued?
Yes.
One moment.
Now's not the time to let down. Now's not the time to celebrate. It's time to do what we do best as a country. Do our duty, our jobs, take care of one another. And we can and will do this, but we can't let up now. My hope is, before the summer's over, I'm talking to you all about how we have even access to more vaccines than we need to take care of every American. And we're helping. Because until this vaccine is available to the world, and we're beating back the vaccine, the virus in other countries, we're not really completely safe. So we've made great progress. I'm still looking forward to the prospect that we keep the pace we're on and we listen to one another, take the precautions I talked about.
For the day. The sergeant will be back tomorrow and we'll resume with his testimony then. Let's shoot for 9:15 again, so the normal.
A 4th of July, an Independence Day on July the 4th, as I defined about 3 weeks ago. I want to have an Independence Day, an independence from the COVID. So you're able to get in the backyard with a small group of people, friends and neighbors, and celebrate Independence Day because you've been vaccinated, because you're safe, because you're in the clear. May God bless you all and may God protect our troops. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Mr. President, Indiana, how are the Vienna talks going?
I'll report on that later.
Mr. President, do you think
think the Masters golf tournament should be moved out of Georgia?
I think that's up to the Masters. Look, it is reassuring to see that for-profit operations and businesses are speaking up about how these new Jim Crow laws are just antithetical to who we are. There's another side to it too. The other side to it too is when they in fact move out of Georgia, the people who need the help the most, people who are making hourly wages, sometimes get hurt the most. I think it's a very tough decision for a corporation to make or a group to make. But I respect them when they make that judgment, and I support whatever judgment they make. But it's the best way to deal with this is for Georgia and other states to smarten up. Stop it. Stop it. It's about giving people freedom.
Despite your personal opinion now, there are many Americans, especially in red states. Why the White House hasn't used a more forceful campaign, like advertisements on television, for example, to convince Americans to take that vaccine so we can
We are doing that. And by the way, the number of people who are reluctant to take it continues to diminish across the country as they see their neighbors, particularly in communities that have been now there's a different group of people. There's a group of people who've been reluctant because of past, how can I say it, past wrongs that have been done to them, experimentation, not sure that they're being told the truth, etc. But then there's another group that seems to me to be, I probably shouldn't characterize it, but Mitch McConnell keeps speaking to them, which I give him credit for, saying the idea that he said the polling data shows Republican men, particularly young men, don't think they should have to take the vaccine. It's their patriotic right not to do it, their freedom to choose. And he's saying, no, take the vaccine. Take the vaccine. And I'll add a phrase he didn't, but I think he believes. It's a patriotic responsibility you have. Last question.
Have you spoken to the Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell yet?
It was an independent operation. And starting off my presidency, I want to be real clear that I'm not going to do the kinds of things that have been done in the last administration. Either talking to the Attorney General about who he's going to prosecute or not prosecute, and under what circumstances, or the Fed telling them what they should and shouldn't do. Or not prosecute, and under what circumstances, or the Fed telling them what they should and shouldn't do, even though that wouldn't be the basis upon which I'd be talking to them. So I've been very fastidious about not talking to them, but I do talk to the Secretary of Treasury. Thank you all very much.
Mr. President, you mentioned 554,064 American dead from COVID-19. A lot of families want to know how this happened, how it got here. Have you had a chance to speak to any of your international partners, any of President Xi, who I know you go way back with? Have you had a chance to ask him if these reports are true that China maybe misled the world at the beginning?
No, I have not had that conversation with President Xi. Thank you.
President Biden marking the milestone of 150 million vaccinations, advancing the goal by 2 weeks of opening eligibility for all Americans to April 19th, urging all states to increase eligibility for all adults ahead of his original goal, which was May 1st. But he made some news on other fronts. He was asked a question, and the White House press corps making the most of their time there at the end of the speech. He was asked about companies pulling out of Georgia, about the broader topic of boycotts based on the voter restriction laws there. His message to Georgia was to, quote, stop it. He said he threw his support behind groups. It sounded like he was trying to encompass companies and Major League Baseball that voted to move the All-Star game. He was
on whether the masters also scheduled in the state of Georgia should be moved elsewhere, that he acknowledged that these type of developments often hurt the people who you don't want to hurt, whether that was a signal to corporations or to find a middle ground for this sort of thing is anyone's guess. Remember, the president was blistered by no less than the Washington Post with 4 Pinocchios for overstating and misrepresenting what exactly that Georgia law is about. Let's go to Phil Wegman right here of Real Clear.
Varghese, a defense attorney as well. So we welcome in everybody. Vinu, you're new to the panel here, so give us your thoughts on day 7 and give us a grand view. Better day for the defense or prosecutors?
I think it was a good day for the defense with the testimony of Nicole McKenzie, who was a EMT and a police officer. I mean, she's the state's witness, and there were objections by the prosecution during her testimony. In fact, one completely bizarre objection as saying that the defense was asking leading questions during cross. I mean, this was just stunning, and it was overruled, but it's a bizarre objection for the state to make. He scored points there. He got her to admit that it was a chaotic scene and a lot of different things could have happened. And then when she started talking about the anti-fentanyl drug and getting into that, there were sidebars, and now she's going to be called as a witness for the defense. So this is a really interesting turn of events for Mr. Nelson and Chauvin's team.
Got it. Vinu again, welcome. Joey Jackson, that is a point you made concerning Nicole McKenzie, that surprisingly she became a defense witness, where Eric Nelson's like, I think I'm going to call you back during my case.
Yeah. Best day for the defense so far. The question is it good enough? And so just backing up. You know, in trials, you have to be strategic about it, and I think the prosecution has been making its case and making it very powerfully, right? We're here now speaking about the use of force issue, very compelling. Prosecution taking it to the defense early on, right? Really recap. 27 years on the force other day, right? Where you have a sergeant come in and say, this is not good, under control, let him go. You talk about Zimmerman, he comes in, 40 years, senior most officer, not good, under control, let him go. You have the chief, we're about sanctity of life, we're about protecting the public, we're about really our values or protecting the community. All very compelling. And then of course we move forward. All of that, Mike, you got the implication and you got the testimony that yes, when someone's in
vaccine pass.
Don't need another witness to give that to the jury. They could infer that. They know that. They were told that. And so what does the prosecution do? They bring in a witness who is exploited now, right, by the defense to give all kind of information about what about the crowd? And are you concerned about the crowd? If the crowd represents a danger, then what do? Yeah, crowd can be very powerful. And what about the fact that somebody can get out of this state of unconsciousness and become Superman and attack somebody? Yeah, you know what? That's true too. And so she gave too much. So the question is whether or not she should have been called in the first instance. I will say though, and I'll end here, you know, yes, it was a good day for the defense, but at the end of the day, the defense is in this box where they have to justify Chauvin's behavior. Really, Mike, can that behavior be justified? And I think you can make the argument that initially the use of force was proper and appropriate, but it's this idea of reassessment and reevaluation, and that's problematic. Yes, initially you may say that the force was okay, but there comes a time where enough is enough and you stop. That didn't happen. This witness, who we'll hear again from tomorrow, has done 2,500 reviews. He evaluates uses of forces. He determines the propriety of them, the fairness, the reasonableness of them, and he's going to say this just was not reasonable. There came a point in time where they should have stopped. They did not stop. Chauvin did not stop, and that, the prosecution will say, constitutes a crime.
That was in opening. We heard Jerry Blackwell say he never got up, he never let up, and we're going to hear that one more time. Cmgus, I'll say this about Nicole McKenzie, and it was simple, and me as a potential 13th juror, so to speak, that's going to stick with me. Once again, as I think back to Officer King trying to find a pulse, he can't. After they don't find a pulse, no medical aid for almost 3 minutes. That's
when you have,
right?
Especially when you have a nurse on the jury in our end that deals with critical care and patients that are unresponsive. So yes, I think it will be an issue. You know, with this witness that is just on the stand from the LAPD, and he has assessed over 2,500 use of force situations, and he was on a board of review, a very prestigious board of review for Los Angeles. But this is the first time with all of the police officers and the trainers and the sergeants and the lieutenants that are trainers that have taken the stand. This is the first time, and the prosecution is the one that brought it up, about the resistance of George Floyd, and they even showed the video of that resisting. Now, of course, they're trying to make a point that there was resisting, but it ended. It ended almost as fast as it began. But the defense will counter that by saying that that formed the state of mind of the defendant with his actions going forward.
Gene, let's stay with you, because as we, just to peel back the curtain here a little bit, we are producing as we're watching. And Gene noted, as she watched some of the body cam footage, it looked to her that George Floyd may have kicked. Lo and behold, the use of force expert, Jody Stiger, makes mention of that. So we have that footage again. And Gene, give us your thought as to what you saw here before we play it.
Well, what I think is interesting is when the prosecution played it in different chunks, you didn't hear what the officers were saying, what George Floyd was saying. You just watched the video. At least I didn't hear. The gnat sound is what you call it. And we'll see if we can hear the gnat sound. Assess it for yourself. See what you think. But it's something to just look at.
I know I can breathe. I can breathe. I can't call me, man. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Please, man. How do you do that to me? Do you want to jail this to me? He's under arrest right now for forgery. Okay, don't you know what's going on? What?
Take him out and just.
For what?
MRE.
I can't fucking breathe. Come on out.
Yeah, just when you get up there. I appreciate that, I do.
You got your Jesus Christ.
Thank you.
Stop moving. Mama. On the front couch. Mama. On my right side back. Mama. You're the best guy. All right. Oh my God. I can breathe. Man. Mama, I love you. Please, I love you.
You got towel?
Yeah, my kid, I love you. I'm dead.
Mine's in my side, it's listed, it's labeled. It says, it's on the
I
top.
can't breathe for this, man. It's cold blooded, man. Mama, I love you. I can't do nothing. My face is gone. I can't breathe, man. Please. Please understand. Please, man, I can't breathe.
Get up on the sidewalk, please, one side or the other, please.
My face is bad.
Here, so you get his legs up.
Oh, my God.
All right.
Gene, go ahead, your thoughts here.
Well, it's interesting to just really watch it, and obviously the resistance ended, but he possibly couldn't resist because they were holding his legs really at every section of his body. What I was trying to see is he in the prone position or is he on his side right there? It seemed as though his chest may have been up, but it's hard to see, I think.
Well, and again, very astute of you to point this out, and then lo and behold, again, we hear it from the expert. Darren Porcher, our law enforcement expert, the use of force expert, and Gene both note the kick in there. So tell us, after that, then it is reasonable to put Mr. Floyd on the ground, correct?
It was reasonable to place him on the ground, but at the same token, when you had him on the ground, it got to a point where he was handcuffed, he was stabilized in the prone position, and the level of force could have receded, or I should say it should have receded, because as we've spoken to this on numerous occasions in the past, you can use force, but you get to a point where once the individual is stabilized, We clearly saw George Floyd was stabilized when he was placed in a prone position. Then we recede and we do something else. And that just didn't happen. Then it gets to the point of former officer Chauvin placing his knee on the back of George Floyd and holding it there for an extended period of time, which prohibited him from breathing, coupled with the inability to introduce medical services after we clearly saw that there was no pulse.
Yeah, and Darren, will stay with you here. So in that video, you hear the word hobble mentioned a couple times. In other words, I think the officers are asking each other, do we need the hobble? Do we need this restraint where we're going to bind Mr. Floyd's legs and wrists so he can't kick anymore? But the use of force expert notes, it seems that George Floyd, after that one kick, that was the only aggressive move, he begins to calm down. Is that the point, Darren, where you de-escalate?
Absolutely. I think that you could have even de-escalated it prior to that. Because when we look to prior to them even trying to place George Floyd into the vehicle, you remember when he was sitting down on the sidewalk? He had a he was relatively calm. He was loquacious. He was a person that was engaged in conversation. It really got hairy when they tried to put him in the back seat of that vehicle. That's when he squirmed and he was non-compliant, so to speak. So you as a police officer should try to make the reassessment and state, wow, when I had him seated initially, he was relatively calm. Go back to that point, and that's where your de-escalation techniques come into play, and use what works as opposed to what doesn't work. You don't want to go the route of the hardest hard. You want to make this as easy as possible. And we've always heard this term, slow things down. How do you best slow things down? The officers understood what they did earlier, slowed things down. However, it exacerbated the incident when they tried to place him in a car, and that's when you need to regress, and it did not happen. So when you speak to the hobble, yeah, sure, that was a resource that was available, but you have to keep in mind, how do we de-escalate?
Right.
And it didn't happen.
And they didn't use the hobble. Let's be clear, a lot of talk about it was not used. Misty, and this all gets to the argument of reasonable or unreasonable. As we watch this video and break this down, it starts with the officers, you can argue, reasonable. Mr. Floyd kicked, he's not complying, doesn't want to sit in the car, but then it gets unreasonable, or does it, is the question, to Darren's point, when they remain on him, a knee on his neck / back, and that's another argument, for the better part of 9 minutes.
Yeah, look, these are the arguments before the jury, but I have to say, and maybe an unpopular opinion, I do not think this expert witness is doing anything for the prosecution at all. I think the prosecution had great testimony relating to use of force from the people that are actually in the Minneapolis Police Department. This expert, I picked out some vulnerabilities. If I were the defense attorney, I would be going berserk at my closing with some of what this expert said. Specifically, the expert used the language, George Floyd was actively resisting officers. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, who said that? The prosecution's expert. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what did the prosecution's expert say Derek Chauvin walked into? He walked into a situation where he saw George Floyd resisting and struggling with the other two officers. Now let's go to this issue of the kick. The expert says, the prosecution's expert says that, yes, George Floyd kicked in a, quote, attempt to break free. To me, these are huge vulnerabilities in the expert testimony. I would be pointing that out to the jury in the closing arguments. Granted, there's more to come from this expert tomorrow, so perhaps we see something come out of it that will be more positive, but I'm not thinking that this was something the prosecution needed to put on the stand, given what we already have out there in testimony.
And again,
fraud in drive-through voting in Texas?
Hi, Nicole. Well, I think you know the answer to that question, which is a definite no.
Well, let me just add all of them. Was there any evidence of fraud in Texas from vote by mail or early access to early voting? Or I mean, were there any stories that I missed at a national level that there was widespread voter fraud in anything that happened this year in Texas?
No, so the Attorney General of Texas, who's under indictment anyway, investigation anyway for his own cases of fraud, his own unrelated to voter fraud, spent millions of dollars and I think found 17 instances out of over 11 million votes cast. He found 17, not 70 or 170,000, but 17 people. And the one time on your show a few weeks ago, I made note of the fact that there was We have 1,500 cases of voter fraud in this country in the last 50 years, and there's been 1.5 million cases of gun violence. Let me give you a Texas stat. There was 17 cases that are being investigated in Texas in 2020. Nearly 4,000 people in Texas died from gun violence in 2020 in Texas. 17, not yet proven, but 17 under investigation, and 4,000, well, a little less than 4,000 deaths by gun violence. So this has nothing to do with what the facts are. It has nothing to do with what the data says. And another thing about Texas, and I've worked on Texas campaigns ever since 1985 here on both sides of the aisle. Texas is, even before this, Texas has always had a problematic system of voting, which is why we've ranked in the lowest 10 in the country in voter turnout. Even with the historic turnout we had in 2020, where more people went to the polls than ever before, we still ranked in the bottom 10 of turnout in the country. So,
and see if your zip code has coverage with the Give Back.
The People versus the Klan, from Sunday at 9.
I look for the well health safety seal at my favorite places.
It means health and safety measures have met rigorous science.
Aren't at the finish line. We still have a lot of work to do.
Why one doctor says real immunity can't happen without vaccinating young people. Could your college kid be required to get a shot before going back to school? Plus the warning tonight about long-term health issues from the pandemic. Military base shooting, the mystery tonight. Why did a Navy medic open fire, injuring 2 sailors? Blunt testimony. An expert witness tells the jury Derek Chauvin used excessive force when he kept his knee on George Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes. Voting rights fallout with League Baseball moving its All-Star game out of Georgia. We'll take a deeper look at the state's new voting law, the bad and the good. Why experts tell us Texas will be the next battleground. Border crisis, the revealing moment we ask students in Guatemala who wants to come to the U.S.
All of you would like to go to the United States.
Frantic rescue, incredible video of a helicopter rushing to save the crew before their cargo ship almost capsized. And superhero kids, one woman's prescription for fighting serious childhood illnesses.
This is the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell, reporting from the nation's capital.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We're going to begin tonight with breaking news and that accelerated timeline for all Americans 18 and older to be eligible for a vaccine. Tonight, President Biden says 2 weeks from now, on April 19th, COVID shots will be available to everyone, saying adults will no longer have to worry whether they meet age or health requirements in order to schedule a vaccine appointment. But the announcement comes with a stark warning from the president that too many Americans think the country is, quote, at the finish line already and aren't following those CDC guidelines. Well, President Biden says that is leading to a concerning new increase in infections nationwide, made worse by those highly contagious variants of the virus. Tonight, the president says he's asking the country to hold out until July 4th, warning there will be more death, disease, and misery if people let their guard down now. Well, we've got 2 reports tonight on the president's new timeline for vaccinations and on that surge of infections.
Now seen in every state of this country. President Biden coming before the cameras late today, moving up that deadline. Every adult will be eligible again by April 19th for the vaccine, and saying this is not over yet because of those highly contagious variants, but that if we take precautions, that we can enjoy a safe, happy 4th of July. So many states seeing alarming upticks. Michigan among the hardest hit by the UK variant. At Beaumont Hospital in Dearborn, for one, some patients are being held in the emergency room, similar to scenes months ago in earlier surges, now waiting for a bed to open up all over again. Cases rising among younger Americans and the unvaccinated, and authorities are keeping a close eye on youth sports now as a potential place for easy spread of the virus. About 80% of teachers, school staff, and childcare workers have now received at least 1 shot. That's good news. 107,609,000 people have received at least 1 dose in this country. That's nearly 42% of all adults now. So tonight here, the new timetable and the urgent race to beat the variants. ABC's Eva Pilgrim leads us off from Michigan tonight.
Tonight, a new cause for alarm across this country in the race between the vaccine and the variants. Doctors inside Beaumont Hospital in Michigan say they're facing a surge all over again.
Just a steep incline in the numbers of patients that are coming in who are really sick. We've got patients who are holding in the emergency room waiting for beds to open up.
As many as 70% of the new cases in Michigan could be from the more contagious and likely more deadly UK variant.
We're seeing a lot more younger adults, middle-aged adults being affected, getting sick and coming in.
Pedro Gonzalez was a healthy 28-year-old before COVID. One of his passions was highlighting small businesses trying to make it through the pandemic.
Just getting that big satisfaction out of knowing that you were able to help somebody in need.
But in March, Pedro tested positive for COVID. He's been on a ventilator for 2.5 weeks.
I thought he was going to be fine. I was, oh, he'll be fine in a few days. You know, he's young, he's strong. Nothing's going to happen. But after seeing his situation now, I just want people to be careful, to take care of themselves.
His 27-year-old brother, Rafael, now infected with COVID too. Cases among the young and unvaccinated are growing. Late today, President Biden moving up his deadline for states to make all Americans eligible for the vaccine to April 19th, 2 weeks earlier than he had promised.
In every part of this country, every adult over the age of 18 or older will be eligible to be vaccinated. No more confusing rules. No more confusing restrictions.
37 states already opening vaccinations to everyone 16 and older, but the president warning the country is only halfway through the vaccination effort.
We can have a safe, happy 4th of July with your family and your friends in small groups in your backyard. The real question is, how much death, disease, and misery are we going to see between now and then?
About 80% of teachers, school staff, and child care workers have already received at least their first vaccine shot. But the CDC is warning about outbreaks among the young, many tied to youth sports and extracurricular activities.
We're seeing more and more young people get into serious trouble, namely severe disease, requiring hospitalization, and occasionally even tragic deaths.
Dr. Fauci just today, Eva with us now from Dearborn, Michigan tonight. And Eva, Dr. Fauci also today saying what we heard from Dr. Jha here on this broadcast last night. This country is on the brink of another surge.
That's right, David. Dr. Fauci saying we are at a critical moment, warning that we could just as easily swing up into another surge, making it clear we are in a race to get vaccines into arms before we have another peak. David?
Eva Pilgrim leading us off tonight from Michigan. Eva, thank you. We turn next tonight to that unfolding scene today. Police responding to an active shooter near Fort Detrick in Maryland. A Navy medic allegedly armed with a rifle opening fire, wounding 2 sailors. Tonight, 1 critically injured. An alert going out today. The gunman then driving to the gate of the base. He was shot and killed by armed military personnel. And what we've now learned tonight about the suspect. ABC's Rachel Scott on the scene in Maryland for us.
Tonight, the terrifying moments in and around Fort Detrick Army Base in Frederick, Maryland.
All units, 1043, city is operating on an active shooter event.
Authorities say this is where the gunman, a Navy medic, opened fire with a rifle around 8 a.m. this morning.
We have a male subject in an Army-type suit.
Carrying a long rifle.
Shooting and critically wounding 2 sailors working at a naval biological research facility within an office at this business park. Those 2 victims airlifted to a Baltimore hospital. Tonight, 1 still fighting for his life. The other released just moments ago.
Is there any indication that the suspect knew these victims?
That's something that our authorities are looking into to find out the relationships, why it began here.
A naval spokesperson telling ABC News the victims were co-workers with the alleged gunman, identified as 38-year-old Fantahun Guillermo Wilcetabat. Minutes after the shooting, the suspect fled to Fort Detrick Army Base where he was assigned, speeding past the checkpoint and taking out his rifle. He was shot and killed by military personnel. Tonight, the FBI now on scene, surrounding the suspect's home, still searching for a motive.
Nothing really stands out except that he was given an award for his marksmanship. Nora.
Jeff Pegues, thank you. And there is chilling new video that has surfaced today of the man who killed a Capitol Police officer last week. Noah Green is seen buying a $300 knife minutes before the attack. Green rammed his car into 2 officers outside the Capitol last Friday, then was shot and killed when he lunged at officers with a knife. Officer Billy Evans, who died in the attack, will lie in honor next week in the Capitol Rotunda. We're going to turn to Minneapolis now and more crucial testimony in Derek Chauvin's murder trial. Chauvin's lawyer has claimed that the fired officer did what he was trained to do when he pinned his knee on George Floyd's neck. Well, today, the lieutenant who trained Chauvin told a very different story. Here's CBS's SIOUX.
More police officers coming forward and testifying against one of their own in the Derek Chauvin trial.
Sir, is this an MPD trained neck restraint?
No, sir.
Has it ever been?
Not to my neck restraint, no, sir.
Lieutenant Johnny Mercel is a use of force instructor with the Minneapolis Police Department. Chauvin attended his training class in 2018.
But we don't train leg neck restraints with the officers in service. And as far as my knowledge, we never have.
Under cross-examination, Mercel testified that officers are trained to use their knee across a person's back or shoulder.
However, we've cautioned officers that be mindful of the neck area and to look for the shoulder.
And the jury heard from use of force expert Sergeant Jody Stiger.
My opinion was that the force was excessive.
Stiger is with the Los Angeles Police Department and has worked in some of LA's toughest neighborhoods.
Once he was placed in the prone position on the ground, they should have slowed down or stopped their force as well.
Meanwhile, a key witness and Floyd's friend, Maurice Hall, made an appearance in court today via Zoom. He was sitting in the SUV with Floyd when officers approached their vehicle last May. Hall's lawyer says her client is refusing to testify about whether he provided drugs to Floyd, fearing self-incrimination.
Give this family strength.
Today, George Floyd's family and supporters held a prayer service outside the courthouse.
But one thing I can tell you, after we get the verdict and we get this conviction, we'll be able to breathe.
The prosecution is expected to start calling investigators of the murder case to the stand. We will likely hear testimony about Floyd's drug use as a way to deflate the defense's argument that an overdose and underlying health conditions caused Floyd's death. Nora?
SIOUX, thank you. We're going to turn now to a battle between politicians and big business. More than...
Yes.
9 Minneapolis police witnesses have already testified against Chauvin, including the department's chief, Madera Arredondo.
But you know, Lord...
Today, Floyd's family praying outside the court, closely following every second of the proceedings. His brother sounding confident they'll get justice.
My family, we have the faith. After we get the verdict and we get this conviction, we'll be able to breathe.
So let's bring in Alex Perez with us again tonight from Minneapolis. And Alex, you reported there now 9 Minneapolis police witnesses testifying against Derek Chauvin. Rare, given so often that blue wall of silence sticking together within the force. And prosecutors also bringing in expert witnesses from other police departments as well.
Yeah, David, the prosecution bringing in outside experts, a sergeant with the Los Angeles Police Department testifying today. He said Chauvin's actions were excessive. The prosecution really trying to hammer home that what Chauvin did is not what officers are trained to do. David?
All right, Alex Perez, we'll see you right here tomorrow night. And we turn now to new and difficult images from the southern border. A young boy alone, in tears, approaching a Border Patrol agent, telling him he'd been abandoned by his group and was scared. Tonight, reports more than 19,000 migrant children are now in U.S. custody. And our chief national correspondent, Matt Gutman, just back from the border, on this again tonight.
Tonight, the fear etched on that 10-year-old's face and the hurt in his voice. Can you help me? He asks a Border Patrol agent who found the little boy, that solitary figure wandering on a barren field near the U.S.-Mexico border in southern Texas. Through the tears, the boy explains he wasn't traveling with his mom or dad. He was abandoned, ditched, in his words, by the migrant group he was traveling with.
¿No vienes con mami o con papi o con nadie? Nadie. Yo venía en un grupo que venía de entrega con usted y al final me botaba y venía aquí a pedir auxilio.
Sobbing, the boy telling the agent he was scared of getting robbed or worse, kidnapped.
También me pueden robar, secuestrar o algo. Te pueden robar.
Thankfully, he was found by authorities and taken to this child detention center in Donna, Texas. We just returned from Texas after flying over that very same facility, now rapidly expanding to handle the thousands of additional migrant children and teens expected. ABC News has learned there are now over 19,000 migrant children in federal custody. And the Donna facility recently so crowded that children were forced to take turns sleeping on the floor.
And Matt Gutman with us from LA County tonight, where officials I know are setting up a massive new facility there to house migrant children as well. And Matt, you're learning more tonight about that young boy?
Border officials, David, tell me that they are assured that he is now safe and they are working him through the system. They believe that sometime in the next few weeks he will be handed over to family members here in the United States. But David, that is a process that is on average lasting more than 5 weeks, so still a long road ahead for that little boy. David.
Matt Gutman live in California tonight. Matt, thanks. Next, families near the site of that toxic wastewater lake near Tampa, Florida, are now going home tonight. Florida officials have lifted the evacuations now and have opened most of the nearby roads. Pumps have siphoned off millions of gallons of that wastewater, reducing the risk of catastrophic flooding. A submersible device will be on site tomorrow looking to plug the actual leak. Authorities acknowledging some of the water has drained into Tampa Bay, now raising concerns about damage to the environment.
How colorful it truly is. A lot of rain going on in northern South Dakota as well as snow out to the west. Just to the south of Sioux Falls, we're beginning to see some of these storms popping up now, and it's kind of that nature where, again, they kind of pulse up, and that's what we saw earlier on this morning, just north of Sioux Falls, where we did see some at least brief hail take place. But this is just kind of the beginning, because as we look a little further to the south of Sioux Falls, there's not much going on just yet. But there will be later on tonight. Meanwhile, further north we go, still dealing with some moderate rain around Aberdeen, stretching toward Pierre. And Pierre, we're actually looking at some snow.
To jump in the middle of a highly controversial issue, particularly when they got their facts wrong. I'm not talking about political contributions. Most of them contribute to both sides. They have political action committees. That's fine. It's legal. It's appropriate. I support that. I'm talking about taking a position on a highly incendiary issue like this and punishing a community or a state because you don't like a particular law that passed. I just think it's stupid.
What do you think, Derek?
You know, I think he refused to accept responsibility. This is about making sure the administration of our elections would allow voters to fully participate, not creating barriers, not erecting scenarios where people could be criminalized, not preventing individuals to provide water, or to ensure that we have open, accessible elections. We fight wars abroad on this issue. We must take hard stands in the United States, in the state of Georgia, across this country, to make sure democracy works for everyone, not just some people.
Derek Johnson, as usual, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up, the latest on the investigation into the deadly January 6th Capitol insurrection, as we learn that the Capitol police officer who lost his life in last week's attack will lie in honor in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda.
Today.
The law, there's no rational basis for the law. When you commit to a criminal law, there has to be a basis that there's going to be harm to a party or to property. There's no harm in someone being humane. So there's no actual criminal nexus here to be humane.
Let me ask you the follow-up.
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you a follow-up, because a lot of people might agree with you, sir, and that's why we've covered the problems with the law. But what do you say to the critique that may sound no different than someone who opposes marriage equality and says they're not going to issue those marriage licenses and these other controversies we've had? In other words, does this just come down to your opinion above what the law states?
Well, I think when you look at the rational basis of the law, there is no rational basis. It basically says that they're going to arrest someone for merely having water, giving water out. I take an oath to seek justice. It would be unjust for a police officer to arrest someone or merely giving someone some type of nutrition or hydration.
It's a very interesting stance you've taken, which is why we wanted to spotlight it. Also, as you know, one that many are debating within a law that, if it stays on the books, remains quite debatable. So we wanted to hear from you, as well as the mayor, Brian Whiteside. Thanks for making time for us tonight.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff Bezos tops its list of richest people at $177 billion. At number 2, Tesla's Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg are also in the top 5. But get this, Warren Buffett dropped out of the top 5 for the first time in 2 decades. But don't worry, he's worth more than $28 billion than last year. The ranks of billionaires grew by more than 30% and now includes Kim Kardashian and Bumble CEO Whitney Wolf Herd. And now to a dramatic rescue in the North Sea today. A Dutch cargo ship caught in dangerously high seas almost capsized, threatening the 12 crew members. A Norwegian Coast Guard helicopter raced to the rescue, airlifting most of the crew off the deck, but a few had to be plucked from the sea. Can you imagine? Well, tonight everyone is safe. Coming up next, it's better than Superman's cape, how a robe can transform a child's fighting a serious illness into a superhero.
If you can't watch the CBS Evening News, you can listen. Formula only found in Preservision.
If it were my vision, I'd ask my doctor.
Lucas Tomlinson, this exclusive story in Washington, D.C. Lucas, thanks. We're back with our panel, Ben, Mara, and Jonathan. Ben, this really didn't get a lot of coverage and seemed like a big deal.
You know, it's an enormous story in terms of an indication of the decay that has happened in our nation's capital. You see the fact that this has happened in broad daylight in front of so many people. I hear that crack in the interviewee's voice about so many people standing around and not doing anything to stop this. There's no reason for you to know this, Brett, but our own car, my wife's car, was broken into violently in broad daylight in D.C. just recently and robbed. This is a city that is really descending into a serious criminal situation under Mayor Bowser, who seems a lot more interested in painting slogans on the street than dealing with the actual problems that her citizens are facing.
This rain is bananas.
America's cable television companies. Today, we're brought to
allocated for, but it is otherwise paused.
And then, is the White House concerned that Major League Baseball is moving their All-Star game to Colorado, where voting regulations are very similar to Georgia?
Well, let me just refute the first point you made. First, let me say, on Colorado, Colorado allows you to register on Election Day. Colorado has voting by mail, where they send to 100% of people in the state who are eligible applications to vote by mail. 94% of people in Colorado voted by mail in the 2020 election. And they also allow for a range of materials to provide, even if they vote on Election Day, for the limited number of people who vote on Election Day. I think it's important to remember the context here. The Georgia legislation is built on a lie. There was no widespread fraud in the 2020 election. Georgia's top Republican election officials have acknowledged that repeatedly in interviews. And what there was, however, was record-setting turnout, especially by voters of color. So instead, what we're seeing here is for politicians who didn't like the outcome, they're not changing their policies to win more votes. They're changing the rules to exclude more voters. And we certainly see the circumstances as different. But ultimately, sorry, let me add one more thing. It's up to Major League Baseball to determine where they're holding their All-Star game.
Okay, a quick one from a colleague who could not be here. You're talking about the new vaccine eligibility deadline. Mm-hmm. Is the supply ramping up quicker than expected? And if not, what does moving the eligibility deadline up actually do in practice? Like, are more people going to get vaccinated faster?
That's our hope. Absolutely. And we have expedited the supply. So there's been nearly 90 million doses.
Which is removing a kidney.
She posted Facebook updates on her daughter's progress
and that caught the eye of Allison Schickel.
She's just this effervescent, beautiful little soul.
The Austin businesswoman makes robes for women recovering from breast cancer. But when she saw Elliot, she designed a superhero robe for a little girl battling big health problems.
She immediately put it on and she started running around. It was one of those moments when I sit there and go, you know what, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing.
The superhero hospital robe has a cape, mask, and pockets for medical devices.
It's like little things, something fun that doesn't feel like a hospital.
Elliot's joy inspired 900 more robes for other kids. She is now cancer-free, but if you ask her, there will always be something special about that robe.
Elliot, what superpowers do you have?
Omar Villafranca, CBS News, still frozen in Los Angeles.
And Elliot's mom is a real-life Wonder Woman. We'll be right back.
This portion of the CBS Evening News is...
While the family of U.S. Capitol Police Officer William Billy Evans, who was killed in that attack on the Capitol last Friday, has just issued a statement saying, in part, quote, Billy was the best father, son, brother, and friend anyone could ever hope for. His death has left a gaping void in our lives that will never be filled. The absolute most important thing in his life was his two children. Their dad was a hero long before the tragic events of last week. And we've also just learned, Wolf, that William Billy Evans will lie in honor in the Capitol Rotunda.
Our hearts go out to his family. Brian, thank you very much. More news right after this.
Whoa.
Elevated scale are going with a smarter hybrid cloud using the technology.
Check every month.
And so here we are at the sort of hypocritical nub of it all. McConnell is fine with the corporations donating to politicians like him. He wants their money. That's self-interest. He just doesn't want them ever doing the thing he claimed he protected, their right to have core political speech rights, when not only does it disagree with him, but guess what? It supports your right to vote, unfettered by guess who? Republican politicians. And that's our final word. The readout with Joy Reid is up after this.
Homeless pets. To learn more, go to BisselCrosswave.com.
Hey, it's me, your dry skin. I'm craving something we're missing. The ceramides.
Be able to help.
If your husband gets lung cancer from smoking, be prepared to spend a lot of time together. Just not the way either of you imagined.
The people you love are worth quitting for. You can quit. For free help, call 1-800-QUIT-NOW.
This detectable. That's when the
sandwich. Double fruit.
It's cozy.
Free at ZipRecruiter.com.
1 second scan. I can check my glucose.
And Trulicity activates my body to release it,
lowering my blood sugar from the first dose. Once weekly Trulicity responds.